welcome to the ADHDads podcast, the first one, take two. Had a little bit of some technical problems, but as anyone will tell you, anyone will tell you with kids, failure is a part of the process. So we learn from our mistakes, we go on, and here we are. So here is the first episode of the ADHDads, take two.
Don't forget it. We're talking about ADHD, so take two is part of our world.
How you doing, JJ? How you doing today?
Oh, doing pretty good, man. Gave my kid a haircut yesterday. It was an adventure. We ended up just going the scissors route, and that resulted in about 1 million paths, 1 million different hair lengths. So it was great.
So, what does Mama think about this haircut that you have butchered your son with?
Let me tell you. So I co-parent with a pretty extraordinary mother, and we've basically tag teams different things, even post divorce. And one thing that we kind of talk about is getting kiddo's haircut done. And the last time she did it, I could tell you there were some obvious differences between this side of the head and this side of the head. So you know what? I consider it a success.
We got a place that's right around the corner from me that takes those old rides that were outside of grocery stores, those fire trucks or ponies and that kind of stuff, and they take the things off of there, and those are what they use as the salon chairs. So your kid can sit in a fire truck as they get their haircut. So that's kind of cool. But
distract them. A big thing that we've experienced is throw an iPad, throw some cartoons, whatever it is, and they forget that there's pain existing in their bodies when they're watching something. I took my kiddo to the ER, and he was locked in on this cartoon. Meanwhile, I'm looking at this open gash in his hand, going, "Oh my God, this is the scariest moment of my life."
Yeah, Mama's just been doing haircuts here, so we haven't found a good black barber for our kids yet that can handle the load. So they're squirmish, and their pain tolerance is not that big. So it's a struggle to get our haircuts cut too, or our kids' hair cut too.
It's about to get out of hand when the barber says, "Guys, seriously."
So here we are, man. I'm so glad to be talking with you, JJ. This is something that we've been wanting to do for a while here, and we're starting out the ending 2022 here on a good note, getting this podcast started. For those of you who are in listen-only mode, we've got our Christmas trees on in the background here, and the holidays are kicking with Christmas right around the corner this weekend. So I don't know if this episode will be released by then, but we'll definitely get things moving along here. So glad to have you, JJ. We're doing this ADHDads podcast here. I guess I kind of want to start with, what does that mean to you, to have this podcast, to kind of have a kid with ADHD, and what do you kind of hope to accomplish with this?
That's something that I think about all the time, is what do I want to accomplish in my life for my kiddo? What have I learned along the way? And, what can I learn from brilliant people in the world who go through it through their own experiences every day? Colton, you and I, we share an experience as being dads and guys who are committed to our families, and our families look a little different than the traditional nuclear family, and that's honestly a really exciting thing. A lot of people are out there, constantly looking for advice, community, so on and so forth, and that's kind of where we're at. We're trying to offer up something as well as learn from people out there. So this is an exciting place to be. In terms of ADHD, my kiddo was diagnosed officially earlier this year with ADHD, and it kind of came through based on feedback we were receiving at school, emotional regulation concerns, and just kind of maybe the little bit of the outliers when it comes to his behavior. Now, granted, he's also 6 years old, so he's a kid. He's going to do distracting things all the time. He's going to have a hard time sitting and focusing. And honestly, when it comes to ADHD, it's a pretty amazing thing to tap into the idea inside of your brain that says, I'm not interested in this, therefore my attention is not really wanting to be placed in this. And I really do succeed in this area. I'm talking mostly about my kiddo, but I too, I've never been diagnosed. And when we were at the when we were at the psychiatrist's office for the first time, he's asking us questions, and he turns to me and says, "So what do you do for a living?" And I told him, I said, "I'm in web development and I do web design and stuff. So I'm pretty creative and kind of stick to the computer, write code and whatnot." And so I talked to him for a little bit about what I do, and then he kind of moved on, and then he kind of goes whoop back to me and it says, "Well, a lot of people in your field are diagnosed with ADHD." And I remember just sitting there thinking, what's he trying to tell me right now? Is he trying to tell me that this is me? This is me here. We're talking about my kid, but I'm the one who kind of just passed that along. So yeah, we as adults, we probably could admit, just like, okay, my younger brother has autism. And autism, when he was diagnosed, was still very fresh and young. In fact, there was a movie that came out called Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, and that was kind of like, that was like a new thing. People didn't really know what that meant. And then we had the local newspaper, come and interview my parents and sit with them and my brother. And the headline for that article in their paper was "Autism, Not Just in the Movies." So, now here we are talking about ADHD, and ADHD is almost so common now that we have so much medical research into the medicine to help children and adults with ADHD that it's one of the most reliable forms of medicine out there, according to the research. So I think the thing is we're discovering so much about ourselves in these years right now that could really help us in the future identify how we can best serve our children, students, the population who has ADHD, who essentially is making up a good chunk of the percentage of our population. And honestly,
yeah, it's funny that you bring that up. I was just reading some statistics today about like 16% of our kids are diagnosed with ADHD nowadays. More so in boys. But that's a pretty big number. And what I find interesting too is a lot of those kids, more than half that are diagnosed with ADHD, also have other conditions, whether it be anxiety, depression, on the spectrum, or some sort of other kind of behavioral issues or neurodivergent conditions. So, I think that's kind of an important factor to kind of take into play too. I think that more of this stuff and that we talk about is a behavioral thing, not something for our kids to really deal with on their own, but for us as parents to kind of go along that journey with them, and kind of course correct our own behaviors in the process, right? I think that this journey for our kids is more about us and how we give them the tools and how we open up the space for them to deal with these kind of things in a safe environment. So, I just kind of found that was interesting. You're right. A lot more of these kids are having this condition nowadays, and there's a lot of different varieties of giving them the tools they need, whether it be medication or whether it be behavioral or us as parents and the way that we interact with them. So, I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is that when it comes to our kids are very much constantly in development, more so than us as fully developed human beings later in life who've established our habits and whatnot. Our kids are still regularly having like a million neural connectivities, new neural pathways kind of growing every second. And therefore, there's just so much development, so much pruning that's existing at a rapid rate for them, and that's big for us to nurture as opposed to somehow stifle. We have books. You're right. We have like resources, books out there that talk about how we deal with ADHD in our children, but it's generally about training us parents, training us adults to best serve these kids, to highlight their superpowers, as we talk about. It's essentially it's an effort to train us, not train our kids. Our kids are working with what we provide them, and if we provide them with a safe environment and we nurture what it is that they really are, feeling their strengths are leading them, it's going to result in even greater success. So it's all about training us.
What did ADHD look like for you in your childhood? You said that you haven't been officially diagnosed, but how did that show up for you? In your family dynamic, or in the classroom, or just for you as a kid? Because I think for me, I was definitely a high strung kid. I had a lot of behavioral issues in school as being the class clown, or a disruptive kid. It wasn't to say that I struggled in school. I think it was kind of the opposite for me. I was someone that got work done first and then didn't have anything to do, so I was very disruptive. And I think my parents came from a generation where this wasn't necessarily like in the public awareness yet. This wasn't something that like parents were like talking about as openly. And ADHD or ADD was kind of, or some of these behavioral or learning conditions was more about, well, they're just kids being kids. It was kind of explained away, and maybe I didn't get some resources, or maybe was misunderstood in a few settings where I was just trying to be a kid, but maybe had my brain working a little bit differently than some of my classmates and stuff. So that was an issue for me always, until I kind of found a home and a creative space to kind of express that. Like you said, and kind of turn it into a superpower. So I'm just kind of curious, how it showed up for you, and how your parents kind of saw it, or what they did, or what tools they kind of gave you to support you along that process, if any.
Yeah, man. Well, again, because there's never been an official diagnosis for myself, I want to be cognizant of the idea that, I don't want to speak for a community that has diagnosis and maybe has been given certain tools, or we talk about 504 plans at school, and kind of some accommodations that come with that. Mine has very much been, like when I was young, I operated a lot of times out of fear. I remember there was one day in second grade, I was just kind of chatting with one of my friends in class, and we started, I started getting a little silly, and I was quietly walking around the classroom, chasing after him. And then I looked up at the teacher, and she's just got like this scowl on her face. She's upset with how I'm acting, and it freaked me out. It scared me. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And then she called me out in front of the whole class and says, "Who else is being distracted by JJ right now?" And all of a sudden all these hands get raised up, and I'm like, I didn't know. I'm sorry, I didn't know what was going on. So I operated out of fear a lot of times. Now, what's interesting is I probably will continue sharing the story of my own son. He's kind of on the opposite side of things. Like, he gets distracted and he acts out, so he very much has an emotional regulation issue that we continue to try and work with. So if he's feeling a certain level of a distraction, he's gonna really lean into that, and everybody else is second place. So everybody else doesn't matter, because his situation is of utmost importance in his mind, and so his emotional regulation is more challenging for him. But like I said, I operated out a lot of fear, and the feedback that my parents received through school, a lot of times I was kind of maybe shamed or just not really understood by my parents. Maybe it was something that they didn't know how to handle, so they often would they'd tell me, you're not acting appropriately, and more or less just made me feel like I was a problem. And that was really hard for me. So I oftentimes, again, operated out of fear because of the feedback I received. Socially, I struggled a lot. There was some pretty severe bullying that I received in grade school, especially kind of around grade 7 and 8, where I was looked at as different, and I just acted different, and kids would kind of jump on that and make fun of me. So socially, I struggled. I was afraid. At home, I often felt like I didn't really have a voice of individuality that was celebrated. It was more or less a regularly kind of looked at it as I need correction. So there were a lot of teachable moments that I received at home, and it felt like my identity was something that was an issue. So a lot of my life early growing up, I was very much, I kind of moved into a space of feeling alone and sad and kind of scared, and that was very hard. And our childhood experience shapes us to the people we are in adulthood. So if in fact I have had ADHD all my life, just the unknown, what it was, the inability to label it when I was young, I think had an effect all my life as to where I am today. So I
Yeah.
misunderstood, or just not necessarily always misunderstood, just having a hard time communicating with the person that I felt that I have been.
It's funny that you say that, because listening to you talk and even describe Cohen, your son here, and I'm trying to think about what was the thing that I felt like I didn't have as a kid, and I'm in a very similar boat to you as well, JJ. I do want to be respectful of our listeners that do have diagnosis, have been carrying that, or been on medication, or dealing with the process of it, where I'm a 35-year-old man and I've got my first appointment to be diagnosed here and go through the process set up in a week, actually. So next week I'm going in to do this 35 years later. I've been on this wait list for 6 months here, trying to go meet with a psychiatrist and start this process. So you guys as the listeners are going to be right along this journey with me and JJ as we go along, and we have a 7-year-old who we're also getting evaluated in the beginning stages of that journey with the school and with her physicians right now. But listening to you talk and trying to think of my own story here and what I felt like I lacked, I can relate a lot to what you're saying with the feeling of aloneness or isolation, or being misunderstood or misinterpreted. I think that was definitely the most predominant thing that reared its head in my childhood. I grew up as a new kid a lot. We moved around, and I went to a different school every year. My longest stint was 3 years out of high school. But before that, it was moving around a lot. So, I was constantly trying to kind of fit in and find my place in the social dynamics, and, kind of faced both ends of the bullying spectrum, where I was bullied and maybe hung out with the wrong kids and tried to fit in some ways that maybe I'm not proud of in my adult life. But thinking about that process, I feel that was something that I lacked, was the connection with my parents, or the willingness or patience to understand the kind of behavior that was showing up, or the disruption in social settings. And that's something that I'm very kind of cognizant of in my own journey as a stepdad, parenting our oldest. I try to really listen to her, and be present with those talks, and try to hear her side of the story. And that's not always easy, right? With a 7-year-old and a 35-year-old man, to try to bridge that communication gap does not always end with an environment of patience, understanding, or the right vernacular that's used to make a 7-year-old understand the words I'm trying to say. But I try. We chip away at it, and that's, I think, my superpower now, is if I can be hyper focused and present, which is hard for an ADHD guy. But if I think of the acronyms of our podcast here, my mind wants to go to, something around attentive, devoted, and hyper-focused dad, besides attention deficit hyperactive dad. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that. And what are some tools that you try to give Cohen along this process, and how do you try to, kind of break that generational support system and give him something a little bit different, or more connected?
Well, yeah. So he is 6 years old. He'll be 7 in March. And one of the things that I've found, each kid is unique. When he is invested in something, he's emotionally invested in it. So he puts a lot of himself into his creations, his play, his being is present when he chooses it to be. So tough things are, when he's playing with somebody else, other kids at school, he wants to kind of control the play. He wants to make sure this is going the way Cohen wants it to go. And I don't blame him for that. He's 6 years old. He doesn't really have a reason in his mind to invest emotionally in these other kids, or at least he can't see that yet. Obviously, as you grow older, you realize friendship is very much involved in reciprocation. So one of the challenges that I face often with him is trying to instill some sort of level of curiosity in him. Or what does that look like when he's playing? Giving other kids praise. And again, let's go back to talking about training the parents. That's a big part of it is I have to train myself to not be reactive, but proactive. We went to the mall one day, and I was really trying to, exercise, put into practice all these things that I've been learning about, my child and how I can best help him succeed. So I was praising him for things that nobody usually praises their kids for, but you could see him lighting up. He's like, "Oh my gosh, Dad, just paying attention to me. He's loving what I'm doing. He's just eating it up." And then he says, "Hey, Dad, watch this." And he walks over to the kids that he's playing with and he praises them for this, like something similar or identical to what he was doing. So it was just, it's remarkable how just little effort it really takes to be a positive, influence on their lives to see a difference. And that doesn't mean he's going to go to the classroom and sit down and, go over math problems for 2 hours. But it does mean that he is putting his focus and energy into something external, which is huge. And that can slowly progress into something else. Cohen is also very much... I mentioned emotions. He's very much attached to his emotions, and he's a fragile kiddo. He's compassionate. He's had moments where maybe he's acting out, and I'm feeling the stress and the tension from that. And it's hard because I see him crying, and part of me is like, well, my kid is acting out. He's crying, but he really shouldn't be crying about that because this is something that he essentially started, and he's in this emotional space because of his inability to regulate in this situation. Well, what good is that for me to say that to him? If I just give him a hug and show him that I love him and that I'm there for him, that makes a massive difference too. He feels safe. He feels cared for. He feels like he can open up. And it's not always easy with a kid who's got their mind on a specific task or specific thing that they want to then switch gears and say, okay, I'm feeling safe and I can embrace this.
Yeah. I think that's so important for our oldest too, is that presence aspect. In the moments that I'm trying to do the man-dad thing and, teach, course correct, instill, there's a lesson, I have to get it in her head. We do that so often as men, When I think where the superpower lies with parenting neurodivergent kids, especially with ADHD, is presence, letting them kind of dictate the narrative sometimes, letting them get their feelings out, letting them identify what's going on existentially in their heads and their hearts. Again, sometimes we see where our kids are going. You want to interrupt them and say, no, but, it doesn't matter. This still needs to happen or whatever. And the times that I've noticed the most success with our 7-year-old is the moments that I sit back and let her get it out, Well, even if I know where she's going, I know where the sentence is going to end, and even if the thing that she's saying doesn't pertain to what I'm going to say afterwards, sometimes the most important thing is just sitting back and taking that back seat and letting her present it the way that she needs to. And in that process, I'm always surprised, impressed, and proud at the words that she can string together to identify what's going on in her head. So I think that sometimes we need to kind of take the back seat to the I've got a lesson here and let her own kids kind of find the value or the lesson with their own words.
His mom and I, we do a great job co-parenting, and there are times where we are open and honest about where we're at. And there was one time I remember she sent me a text and said, I'm hoping that you can take him for an extra day this weekend. And she just basically said, I give my everything to him when he's with me. and sometimes it's really hard. And I sat back and I didn't think, wow, she just can't handle this. No, I completely empathized. I understood where she was coming from, because yeah, it can be incredibly draining at times, to have to kind of give so much of yourself and sacrifice so much of yourself when you're feeling, drained from your kiddo who's just trying to, have a present communication with you, and share something great with you. And kind of to build on top of that, one of the things that I kind of noticed in my situations with my kiddo is, if I lean into the escalation of the situation gets further drawn out. So I'm actually expelling more energy because I've instead given into the escalation rather than listening and just being a presence. There was a beautiful video I saw a couple years ago where a child was breaking down in front of his dad and just crying, and his dad just got down on his knees and just stared at him while this kid was crying. And then the next thing you know, the kid just leaned into him, gave him a hug. And that whole situation, maybe he didn't completely de-escalate, but that made a world of difference between both of them and their energy levels as well. It's the power of being present and not giving into that escalation. Because honestly, I've given into the escalation too many times. And what does that mean? That means I escalate it further. And then kiddos with energy that never ends, ADHD kids, are like, well, escalation goes up higher for me. Yeah. I'm going to run until I'm in a wall.
Well, you escalate it, and it may work in the moment, but then the next day it's like we have to up the ante, right? Like that threat, that consequence, that tone of voice doesn't seem to go as far, and you need to up the ante. And then before you know it, it's like we're at a level that's like, how did we get here? And I appreciate you saying that piece, because I think that, dealing with that aggression and that tone of voice and what I'm saying and how I'm saying to not only my kids but my wife, I think is a really important growth point in my life, right? I'm a 6'4" guy. I'm 225 pounds. My voice can carry, especially with little kids. I can come as a very domineering presence, and my dad was a big guy. He was, big in stature, big in voice, big in volume, and he had a lot of tone to his voice. We'll say. And that's something that I just have to be cognizant of. And so that journey with aggression and patience is near and dear to my heart, and something that I try to be very cognizant of in my own parenting path and how I reprimand the kids, especially as a stepdad. I definitely feel that my consequences or punishment aspect of my parenting, it maybe look a little different than yours, right? You talked about you have a co-parenting situation there, and I would definitely love to kind of hear more about that. It sounds like you guys have a very healthy communication line, with that dynamic, and I think that's an important aspect for our listeners, because that's something that I definitely hope to garnish with this journey, is chipping away at the kind of co-parenting dynamic. If I can get one thing from this podcast, I hope that we can all sit down with our co-parents and have an open dialogue one day. That's my end goal. So yeah, it's interesting that we come from these different backgrounds and how we deal with it. And like I said, I'm interested to kind of hear your journey and how you got to where you are and how you guys go about co-parenting, especially with as you're getting diagnosis for neurodivergent stuff like ADHD, and how you guys kind of communicate about what course to go,
Yeah, co-parenting is a big part of my life. It's something that obviously when I got married, I didn't think, well, eventually this is where I'm going to be and this is where I want to be, but I've been given the opportunity to take a difficult situation and make something as good as possible from it. And I think that's a topic that can go for many episodes, and most likely will be discussed over time. But I'll just say this much to that. First off, I want to applaud you for being the bonus dad in a family who you fully have embraced that as a father to these children who look up to you and love you in the same way as a father would be loved by his own children. And that's a remarkable challenge, and something that I would say looks different from a traditional family setting. Even though I think in some ways fathers do get into the habit of taking the back seat when it comes to parenting, and the mother kind of is the driver. We don't want that to be the case. We want it to be a partnership. So now we talk about, what does it look like in co-parenting? I don't think that my ex-wife and I will ever see eye to eye in exactly what that looks like, but it doesn't mean that we're at odds either. It just means, maybe she sees this situation a little bit different than I do. And what do we do about that? We discuss it. We talk about it. If it's a big issue, a big moment or a big topic of discussion, it'll be addressed, and it'll be addressed in a positive way. And a lot of things that I've learned throughout the last few years is, how do you address something like that? You ask questions. So if I'm going to take, for example, give my kiddo a haircut, and he is very much resistant to any clippers, all of a sudden I find out yesterday for the first time ever, I could not seem to get him to sit in his seat anymore. And it was very difficult. What did I think about? Well, his mom is a presence that can bring calm to the situation when he's feeling uneasy, he's feeling uncertain, maybe he's feeling unsafe. I don't know if I'm bringing a certain level of distrust for him in this situation, but for whatever reason, he was not feeling comfortable enough to sit back out in his chair. So what did I do? I called his mom. I said, hey, I got Cohen here. He doesn't really want to get his hair cut. We're kind of just stuck in the middle of the situation. And then she was able to talk with him and talk with me and work things out to the point where he was comfortable enough. He was talking, he was sharing things over the phone with his mom, and sat down. And the next thing you know, one thing he says, don't get the scissors close to my hair or to my ears. Don't get it close to my ears. And I'm just chatting with him about whatever. It was great. He was getting comfortable and joking around. And here I am. I'm grabbing this hair right by his ear and snip it off, and he's just continuing to chat. So I guess bringing that back to co-parenting, it is incredibly valuable to have parents on board with each other. They don't have to agree with everything, but when they're working together, it's that scene in the bathroom yesterday. It's just another obvious sign of how his mom and I work together to help him succeed in every day and every situation. We have him go to school, and we get reports from the school where sometimes it's good, sometimes that's not. This last week we had a situation that was difficult, and his mom was there to kind of learn of the situation. We actually go to a school where the parents can teach in the week. So she teaches art, I teach math, and he was having a difficult day, and she sent me a text and said, you know what, the school's going to let you know a little bit later that this went down. I wanted to let you know. And then we chatted about it. So I think the thing is that I want to kind of circle back around to with co-parenting is that when I knew that she and I and our relationship was likely to come to an end, I said, okay, I got to shift my focus here. How do I do that? Well, I am going to be an influence on my child's life up until age 18, and of course beyond that as well. And I'm always going to have his mom in my life. I don't have to be in charge of her, but I do have to serve her. I have to serve her through my son, and I have to serve her for my son. So that was my big my shift of my mindset, is that while I served her in our marriage, I knew that service to her wouldn't end. It had to be out of love for him and for her going forward. So co-parenting is of the greatest importance, even if our relationships, our marriages don't work out. That's one thing that I hold dear to, and I believe our children are going to be healthy, and they're going to grow up to be successful in their relationships if we show that to them in marriage or in divorce.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you brought that there and said all that, because I think that it's such an important mindset to have. especially in these divorce dynamics and where, men have to deal with their exes and there's kids involved and that line of communication doesn't stop. I'm pretty fortunate in, I do come from a previous marriage. We were together for 9 years and we didn't have any kids. That may have been one of one of the many reasons why we didn't end up working, but we didn't have kids. But I do come from a marriage, but I don't have to have that open line of communication that a lot of fathers do, right? Dealing with the other co-parent and the kid's mom, where it stopped, where I know that my wife now is can be jealous of the dynamic, right? Because there's a lot of hard feelings that go from a whole relationship, a whole history, a whole life that happened private or previous, right? There's a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma, and I think a lot of guys can get caught in a mindset of I don't want to necessarily say victim mentality, but there's a lot of tit for tat, back and forth. She did this, so I did this, or this happened because she had this or said this or treated me this way. And there's just a lot of blame, and rightfully so. Again, there's a lot of history and hurt there, and it's not wrong to think that, but it's good to see you on this journey of framing it different. To put your kid first and to be a child-centric relationship where you guys have the best interest of your kiddo at heart. And you don't, I'm sure it's a struggle and it doesn't happen easily, but you seem to be able to put whatever history is there in a place where it doesn't affect your decisions moving forward. So I'm really excited to kind of get into that more with you on the show and in further episodes, because I think that you're the guy to talk to when it comes to developing that healthy co-parenting dynamic. So I'm really interested to hear more about your story and again, kind of how you got into that mindset and what you did for yourself to kind of think that way, because that's right on, man. Really, really proud of you for bringing that to the table and the way that you go about it in the relationship that you have with your ex.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. It's it's definitely a long journey. One thing that I can kind of share that's applicable to so many situations. We talked about childhood and kind of growing up with possible ADHD and how do you navigate, and a lot of times it involves parents, and how do the parents train themselves to work with their children. And now that I'm an adult, I have to take ownership over who I am. I can't keep blaming my parents for some of the trauma that's affecting my behavior now. Just like with my ex, like, what good does it do to blame her? I listened to a great audiobook that you actually shared with me from Russell Brand, and in that audiobook he said to justify our misery is to recommit to it. And I fully embrace that concept, basically saying, it does sitting in this space of bitterness or feeling like I have reason to feel this way and blame this other person, does this actually propel me forward to be a better me? I would say the answer to that question is obviously no. So taking ownership and taking charge of your life will bring you the greatest blessings and rewards in return. And of course, that just is a ripple effect to our children.
Right. Yeah. It's so easy to fall into that mentality, that victim state of mind, that poor me, or things didn't work out, or I was given this, so I am this, and I'll be honest, I fell into that a good chunk of my life, man. It wasn't until my 30s here and until I started hanging around with kids, that was the important motivator for me to say, oh God, I don't want to fuck this up. I don't want to go down this path. But a lot of my 20s, I did have some ways about me, some relationships, some anger issues in my communication or lack thereof, that I blamed on my childhood, on my dad's way of being, on generational trauma, right? And I think a lot of guys go there, and again, rightfully so. It's a good reason, but and you have every right to go down that path. But also, what you're saying with the extreme ownership part of it, it is up to us to catch ourselves educate ourselves and put tools in front of us to stop that cycle. You know, I spent a lot of my life running from the fact that I didn't like that I had an angry part to me, or that, you know, my dad had an angry part to him and didn't show me how to deal with it. And I kind of fell into the poor me, or, you know, this is the cards that I was given, so I don't know how. But, you know, I don't know if this is a bit of tough love for anybody out there listening, but that's not the case. You know, I don't know if you need to hear that, but that's not true. You got to stop telling yourself that story, because the narratives that we put through our in between our ears are really powerful. And the second that I stopped telling myself poor me and this is what I was given and this is the only way, is when I started getting some power back into myself and thinking, you know what, it's not, and I can.
Well said, my friend. And yeah, I'll just cap that by saying, when something bad happens and we're affected by it, you know, that there are external forces that sometimes, you know, do affect us. It's how we respond and how we process that and move forward with it that can really help us succeed through that. So yeah, life sometimes isn't always easy, but we don't have to choose that it's going to remain difficult. And what does that look like? Well, it looks different for, you know, for everybody. I had a very, very challenging 2018 when I was going through divorce and things felt unfair, things felt out of my control. And the truth is, yeah, some of that was out of my control, but that's okay. Again, my son is going to feel the good or feel the bad depending on how I respond in those situations. And you know what? One of the greatest gifts through all that was it required me to step up. I needed to be the better version of myself and for my kiddo. There was nothing that was actually preventing that from happening. Nothing. His mom did not force me to be a bad person. I allowed myself to make bad choices. But then I decided, you know what? This isn't going to continue. I don't have to do this. I don't have to be this person that I don't care for. And that was the big change.
Mm. Yeah, you know, I think like I was saying, I think I grew up with a dad that had a lot of anger issues or aggression issues, but he also had a lot of value to his parenting and to his fatherhood, you know. And I was so busy in my head being an angsty teenager and a kid with undiagnosed ADHD that, you know, I wasn't going to listen to him, you know. But the older I get and the more situations that I'm faced with in parenting and the more challenges, you know, I see, man, this is what my dad was trying to tell me, right? Like he was yelling it and he was using a whole bunch of words that I couldn't understand because his volume was so up and he was so demonstrative that the message couldn't get through to my thick skull, you know. But you know, the older I get, I see, oh, that's what he was trying to say. I get it. You know, those were the lessons. I just wish that he had presented it in a different way, you know, for me and my brain and my emotions and, you know, who I was. But again, you know, the older I get, the more grace I have with giving people, you know, and a little bit more forgiveness I have for not only myself, but my dad. And, you know, it's something that cognizant that I try to be with the kids is, you know, God, I know I'm going to fail and I'm not always going to be perfect at this, but, you know, if I can really try to keep that frame of mind in my head of what that felt like when I was a kid and to be misunderstood, going back to what we were talking about, right? Like our kiddos just want to be heard, man, you know. And sometimes we forget as adults, like they're little human beings, they're not kids, you know. We are raising human being adults, we're not raising kids. And sometimes you are the one with your emotional intelligence and maturity that has to get down to their level to communicate with them. You can't expect them to do that for us, right? So, you know, that's definitely something that I try to implore a lot, is just how can I communicate in a way that she's gonna get this, not that makes me feel better or quote unquote heard.
excellent, looking back in reflection to recognize, yeah, I felt unheard, I felt unsafe. There was also some good message that was somewhere kind of being thrown at me in the middle of all that, and then having some grace and forgiveness for, for your father and for the situation as you grew older and started to understand some of the wisdom that actually was following, all the maybe all the loudness. That's a huge sign of maturation, and one of the reasons why I'm really grateful to be on the journey with you, because I get to witness that and see so much growth from the process, and the fact that we can take what we felt shame over and push away from shame and become that much more of an influence and a good a good example in our children's lives. Like, dude, that's setting them up for success. It doesn't matter if they have ADHD at all. This isn't in any way something that is, preventing them from being able to recognize their true potential. Instead, we're actually equipping ourselves through that process, through what you just said, to even, bring them to even greater heights, or at least be there along the way to cheerlead them. And so I know I've been making mistakes pretty regularly myself, and I look forward to telling the listeners some really vulnerable things that I've done that I would say I was ashamed of, but learned a lot from, because imperfection just goes through my veins every day. So I'm excited to kind of share and be vulnerable in these moments. Like I said, that bad person or that person who made bad choices. I'm not a bad person, but I made bad choices and I learned from them. It sucks that I had to, I would say that I had to hurt somebody to learn more about myself. But at the same time, his mom went from saying she didn't want to have another kid with me to years down the road after our divorce saying that she's very proud that I'm my son's dad. Like that says a lot. That means that we're capable human beings and we learn from these mistakes that we make.
Yeah, man, I'm really glad to hear that, and I've got plenty of guilt and shame to throw on top of yours. Some guilt and shame that's turned into some valuable life lessons. So I am also very excited to share more of my story and those lessons that I've learned along this process. So I think we've got some really good stuff coming up in future episodes here. I've got some really interesting guests that I'm excited to bring on board and some interesting topics of conversation. So I think, here's a good way to end it here for this first episode. Next week, I would love to have us back and really dive into this kind of our co-parenting dynamics now and what that looks like and why we value that and kind of how we garner some healthy relationships during that process, because it's definitely something that sounds like it's both near and dear to both of our hearts. So I would love to spend an hour next week talking about that and how we can give our listeners some tools and methods on how to do that better in their lives.
Absolutely, buddy. The greatest badge of honor I've ever received is the one that's called Dad. And
right on,
it also is known as friend. It's known as cheerleader, but Dad is my ultimate badge of honor.
It's bonus dad in my world, or Coley Colton, as the kids like to say. That's the nickname for stepdad that they've given me. I'm like Macaulay Culkin stand-in Coley Colton. So I'll take it. I love it. I embrace it. So thank you, JJ, for doing this with me. Thank you to our listeners for staying tuned. Please make sure to like, subscribe, share, and stay tuned next week where we're going to be getting into some co-parenting stuff. So thank you. This has been the first of many of the ADHDads podcast. Have a great day, guys.
See you guys.